Hello, this is Reen, and I am back. And this is going to be part 2 to the last video that I did. The last video I did was Schizophrenia, an uphill battle in a downward spiral. And so I mean, this is years and years worth of experience that I've been through with my son who has diagnosed illness, and he's been afflicted with it for many years, since the age of 19. And so from what I've read, and I want to make this disclaimer, I am not a doctor or a specialist in the area. I'm a mother who has been through this with my son, and I love my son, and I feel like I've done probably not everything I could do, but most of everything that I can do for him, to learn about it, to research, to study about it, and figure out everything that I need to know as a care provider. I am not his care provider as an adult. His brother is, and so he really takes care of him as far as all his needs. I'm here because I'm his mom, and I help out, and I'm really busy, so I'm thanking God that I do have his own brother who is his care provider. Okay, so I want to read to you I think it's a sentence in the book that I am writing, and I've been writing this since 2011. It's been a long time, but things happen in between that. I Am Woman was birthed, and I wrote a curriculum on recovery from addiction. Although I haven't been in any type of addiction at all, God just gave me whatever I needed to write, and I did out of obedience. So in 1933, excuse me, that is way off. In 1993, it was the beginning of a revelation of a distant, detached, and preoccupied world that a schizophrenic person is forced to live in. In the summer of 1993, my son had been involved in an accident and had suffered a head injury. Now, this was an accident that totaled the car, and it was pretty serious accident. And okay, so I write some things. I write some really detailed things that I don't really want to go over, but he was 19 years old at that time. I think I've already mentioned that. And we thought he did have a future to look forward to. It might not be the one that we planned, but he did have a future at that time to look forward to, and he still does. There was another thing that happened after the accident. Actually, the accident happened next. The first thing was that he was beaten by his so-called friends. And I believe everyone was drinking, according to what he told me, and they were playing around in the house, and the next thing you know, it turned into a wrestling match, and my son ended up being unconscious overnight, and so he had, I believe, a head injury. And then after that, he got into the accident. Well, then he was diagnosed, and I believe it was 2 years after all of this happened. The accident and the beating took place like a month or two in between both. And so, why am I talking about this? Let's see. I'm talking about this because I am an advocate against violence and abuse. And I'm not necessarily talking about the abuse that my son suffered. That is a part of it. But I have an organization, and it's called I Am Woman. Woman meaning but it's an acronym for Worthy of Majesty and Nobility. So, and the reason why I even went on this topic was because I was suffering through my own challenges, which are, at that point, depression. And after the depression, because I'm completely healed, delivered, and set free from that, because God did that for me. God touched my life, and I am no longer afflicted with that depression at all. And for those of you that have gone through depression, it's a very dark, gloomy, ugly place. You go to bed depressed, you wake up depressed. And there are good days and there are bad days. And so I know what is good and I know what is bad, and I know what depression is and I know what it's not. For me, personal, I'm not a doctor. But I know that I no longer wake up with that dark cloud over my head, ever. And I don't go to sleep with it either. I'm not saying that people can't be sad. There's times in the day when you might feel sad about something, but you recover from that. Depression is very different. So, because of suffering through depression, and then being healed from it, then I wrote the curriculum for I Am Woman. I'm stating this again because some people might not watch the videos previous, and they may not watch the videos after this one. So I like to make it a point to say that when I wrote the curriculum, then things began to happen. It actually started it's like a school, because we offer classes, and there's a session of 13 classes for the program. Well, anyway, the reason why I'm talking about both is because I was suffering through my own challenges when I was having to try to figure out what was going on with my son. So I had multiple things going on in my life that were major. So it's not just the average, I'll say, person that's been through depression. I went through the depression along with some of the biggest challenges of my life. My son was afflicted with an illness, and I had no idea whether or not it was even an illness. I didn't know what it was. And so I had to try to figure out how to help him, help myself, and at least try to move forward. So that's why I'm talking about this, because yes, I speak a lot about being an advocate against violence and abuse, but I also want to give you more details of how big of I say miracle this has been, that God is able to heal me, and I am able to move forward with a future, even though I've been through what I've been through. You can do it too. I have a blueprint on how God can change your life. It's what we teach in the classroom. So, just going into a little bit more about the challenges of dealing with my son and trying to help him, and dealing with my own personal challenges. That in itself is something that I hope will help you. Now, your other challenges that you have might be depression and finance problems, depression and maybe your marriage, or challenges with your children, or your work, or whatever. But this is life. This is what happens in life. It's an imperfect world. So nothing is going to be perfect. But you have to hang on and know that there is hope. Nothing stays the same. I said this in the last video. Nothing stays the same. Things change. A lot of times they're going to change because of our choices. We make choices to change them. We make choices to do something different so that those things can change. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what started. Yeah, I'm looking at something. The fan is on and it's causing things to move. And in the beginning, when my son first started changing behaviors, I talked about him leaving the car. Wherever he was driving, he just left it and he would walk home. And I'm like, this is the most odd behavior I've ever seen from my son. I don't understand. I don't get it. Well, there were other things that were happening. He sat in the car with me at one point, and I don't know if there was an electrical issue with my overhead light in the car, and he started to tell me that he had that he said, "You see that, Mom? They're trying to they're watching me. They're trying to communicate with me." And I'm like, who's trying to communicate with you and who's watching you? I mean, he had just been beaten by his friends, and I was thinking he was talking about some person, but he wasn't. He was talking about the overhead light because it flickered. And that was one of the behaviors that I couldn't put together, because I had no idea of what the symptoms were of any type of illness that would pertain to that. Illusions, delusions. I talked about that in the last video. And these early stage symptoms were frightening. They were scary because the health of my child is what I was scared about. He didn't scare me. I wanted to believe, like I said in the last video, that he was an alcoholic and these things were happening because he was just drinking too much and had become addicted. Alcohol seemed like more of an easier problem or challenge than a mental illness. So after all that denial, my other son, he told me that I had to take him to the doctor. I did. I explained that in the last video as well. And then other things, another example was that after his beating from his friends, they are so-called friends, I'll say, he had a black eye for 6 months. Well, that black eye also was an indicator to him that they were trying to communicate with him. And who they is, I don't know. But he said they're trying to communicate with me and they watch me, and what they did is they implanted something in my eye, and that's why I have a black eye. So these behaviors became so odd to me that I was like, I could not believe that this son that I have known for 19 years, that had been completely well, mentally, emotionally, physically, and every other way, well, now he is not well. Something is going wrong. And so he began to tell me about different things that made him very aware that someone was watching him or wanted to communicate with him. Okay, so we were really, really up for a long-term battle. I didn't realize then what was taking place. I had no idea. So he was actually diagnosed with medications, and I talked about that kind of in detail in the last video. I won't go through that. But I talked about soon after the first medication, he began to get his life back. His thinking pattern had returned back to normal. And I'm like, wow, what is this medication? It is amazing. And unfortunately, the diagnosis and the meds can sometimes have times of stability and instability. And so it didn't last for a very long time that he was stable. And so at that time I learned that he would experience many onsets of this illness. And anyway, let me stop worrying about what I wrote so I can talk to you about my experience about it. Understand that during all this time that I was realizing that my son's behaviors were changing, that I was being abused and violated and assaulted. And so it made it very difficult for me to be able to focus on just me or just my son, and even both of us together. And I had to be concerned for my other children because they didn't understand what was going on with him. Although, like I said, one of my other sons said that, you know, he needed to be evaluated and checked on medically. So we did that. But the reason why I say that I had to be concerned with what was going on with him is because they were very social. And they all had their own friends, and then they had friends in common. And so they hung out together, and all of a sudden they have a brother who is not well and is behaving very oddly. Well, it was very difficult for them. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong. What I'm saying, this is reality. They became embarrassed and ashamed and hurt and in pain because they loved their brother. And probably even felt guilty because they were embarrassed and ashamed. But they would stand up for their brother. And so I had that going on. I had, that was in addition to what I was going through and what their brother was going through and what they were going through. So it's a very, very difficult situation. So I felt like this is important enough that I talk to you about how I recovered from all of it. All of it. I recovered from my son's illness. I recovered from my own challenges and the violence and abuse that I had been through. And God put me on a path. You know, He made all the crooked paths straight. That's scripture. And He really did. Now things are so different. They didn't stay the same, but I had to make choices. And that's my whole point in all of this, is making choices. Now I'm sure, and I hope no one ever has to go through what I did. But there are going to be things that happen in your life. And if your life is one way one day, and it's not a good thing, it can be totally different, depending on how the choices you make and how you operate and what you decide to do about your situation. I want you to have hope. I want you to know that God is for you. He is not against you. And He wants you to be complete and whole. I say that in every video. Just know that you are going to have a future that is good. The end is better than the beginning. That's another scripture. It really is. The beginning didn't turn out so great for me. The beginning was a lot of pain and hurt and abuse and violence and assaults, and the end is, although I live in a real world and I still have things that I deal with, this is the deal. I know that it's not going to stay the same. Tomorrow is going to be different. Joy comes in the morning. And so I have to continually tell myself that God is for me. These are tools and skills that you can use to help you so you don't stay stuck in the negative. You don't stay stuck in all that pain. You're going through something. You're not staying stuck in it. I want you to have a message of hope. I want you to know if God can do it for me, He can do it for you. And that's the reason why I decided, I usually don't give too many details about what happened in my life, what caused me to have such pain. But I decided that I am going to do that. I'm going to give you details. I'm going to tell you what really went on in my life to cause me to do what I'm doing today. I fight for a cause. And my cause is so you can recognize your worth and value. So you can understand that you mean more to God than you'll ever understand or ever know. He loves you so much. And you have the ability to call on his name and ask him to come into your life and touch you and change your situation. You really, really do. I'm proof. I am proof. Living proof. And God proved to me, he didn't have to prove it to me, but he did, that I am worthy and I'm valuable. And I deserved to have a divine birthright to have peace in my life. So I have peace in my life. Although I have the situation, my son is still diagnosed with the same and afflicted with the same illness. My other sons have, in a way, especially one other one, has basically given up his life to help his brother. And that was a choice he made. I never pressured my sons to do what they do, ever. I knew that they didn't have to make a choice to say, I'm going to be a care provider for my brother who is afflicted with a diagnosis. They just made mostly the one that's his care provider, made the choice that he wanted him to have a great life. And I can't remember how he put it, but he said a quality life. That's what he said. And so I'm blessed. That's a blessing. Did I ever think that I was going to have other children that would help me